Shalom. Today's Daf Yomi is Yuma Daf Test Yuma 79. Today's Daf Yomi, the Gemara begins with a question that Rav Papa asked. We had seen earlier back in the Mishnah at the beginning of our chapter that our rabbis had said that the prohibition to eat on Yom Kippur by kares is the penalty is if a person eats a koseves, a person eats a date. So the rabbis asked the question, koseves shamru, when the rabbis said that if you eat the size of a date, you're going to be liable. Do we look at this? How do we look at this date? Big Garanisa, do we look at it with its pit, the date with the pit? And that's when the Mishnah says, Koseves kamo v'garanisa. It means with the pit, with the date with its pit. And we look at the date and the pit together. And here we'll take Rashi's explanation of this. O below garanisa, or rather what it means is we look at the date or the pit, meaning to say we look at the size of the date or the size of the pit, each of them independently. So the Gemara says, well, this is similar to another question. The question that Rav Papa asked is similar to a question that Rav Ashi asked in our Mishnah in Olos chapter 2, where it says, Etzem Kisaora, that we know that a bone of a human body is going to make you tameh if you touch it or you carry it, if it is the size of a barley corn. And so how do we determine the size of that barley corn? Bikli pasa or below kli pasa? Do we measure the barley corn with its shell or without its shell? Bilacha o biyavesha. Do we measure the barley corn when it's moist, when it's fresh, or when it's actually bigger, or when it's dried out? So Rav Ashi, who asked a question about the barley, about the etzem kisaora, the bone the size of the barley. He didn't ask Rav Papa's question. Rav Papa didn't ask Rav Ashi's question. Rav Ashi, Rav Papa, he didn't ask about the date. Why? Gasit, because it says koseves agasa, a large date, meaning to say kol kama de gasa, as long as it's as big as it's possible. And that means we measure the date with the pit in it. Rav Papa, Rav Papa didn't ask about Rav Ashi. Why? Lacha shiboas mikri, because if it's fresh, it's called a shiboas, and meaning to say then it's and that is a barley shalobakli pasa. That's a barley without its shell, and ushla. So, and shalobakli pasa, if it's fresh, it's called a shiboas, and shalobakli pasa, and if it's without its shell, ushla mikri. It's not called a saora, it's called a barley, and so therefore he didn't ask that questions. So it's not called a barley, it's called an ushla. So Amar Rabba, Amar Rav Yehuda, koseves agasa shamar. So now the Gemara is going to bring a dispute as to what is the size of this date when we're talking about it. So Rabba says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, this date that they talked about is Yisera Mibeitza. It's going to be larger than the size of an egg. And even though in general, when we talk about the prohibitions in the Torah with eating, it refers to an olive size amount, the law is different on Yom Kippur, because on Yom Kippur the prohibition is said with respect to affliction. All the things that you should not afflict on this day. V'kimu Rabbanan, and the rabbis have established that when it comes to a date the size of an egg, larger than an egg, that if it's larger than an egg, you're going to be appeased by it. But if it's less than the size of an egg, you're not going to be appeased by it. And so therefore, the rabbis are in the position that that's why he says, according to Rabbah, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, that this koseves agasa has to be larger than the size of an egg. So the Gemara says, but wait, is that really the case? That the date on Yom Kippur is larger than the size of an egg? How can we say that? Meisvei, we're going to challenge Rabbi Yehuda from a Mishnah, because it says in Masechta Sukkah, Maisa, there was an incident on Sukkot, Veheviu Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai with Thomas Atashel. They went to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to taste some food, and they brought to Rabbi Gamliel shtei kosavos udli shamayim. They brought to Rabbi Gamliel 2 dates and a bucket of water, or a pail of water. Va'amru, and they said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Gamliel said, Hela musukah, we don't want to eat these things out of the sukkah. Bring the 2 dates and the pail of water up to the sukkah. Vitania, we learned about it. It wasn't really the law that you need to eat them in the sukkah, because if you're eating something what's called achilos arai, like not a meal, and you're drinking just like on the go, you're allowed to eat in the sukkah. But el aratzu hachmir atzman, they want to be strict and eat them in the sukkah. And ukeshenasnu lo Rabbi Tzadok, and when they gave it to Rabbi Tzadok, Ochel, he ate the bread pachos mikabeitza, less than the size of an egg. And he had three leniencies on here. First of all, he didn't wash his hands because he said less than the size of an egg, you don't need to wash your hands. And so therefore, Natala b'mapa, he took it in a cloth. Achol chutzol sukkah, he ate it outside the sukkah because it was less than the egg. And he didn't do a birkos hamazon because he wasn't satisfied. But we see from here, that from this Mishnah, that less than the size of an egg, you can eat outside the sukkah. However, hakabeitzef will be will be the size of an egg by sukkah. It would require a sukkah. And if you're going to say that a date with its pit is bigger than an egg, well, if that's the case, two dates with no pits, are not the size of an egg. Are you going to say that a date with its pit is bigger than an egg? And the Gemara says, yeah, that's exactly what we're going to say. I'm Rav Yirmiyah in Shtei Kosavos. So two dates without their pit are not the size of an egg. But But a date and its pit is bigger than the size of an egg, and that's indeed the case. We see from here that on Yom Kippur, the actual biblical prohibition is to eat food that will satiate you, and that's why the size for it is, for eating food on Yom Kippur, the biblical prohibition of kares is koseves agasa, a date, unlike the other prohibitions, which generally speaking were referred to an olive.